Hunter x Hunter is chock full of incredibly smart characters doing incredibly smart things. Seriously, I feel like the average IQ of the characters we follow is easily 130 plus. As you might imagine, this makes choosing just 10 moments and then ranking them in order borderline untenable. Not because of a lack of such moments, but precisely because of their abundance. Adding to the difficulty of the whole endeavor is the fact that coming up with an objective and precise criteria for judging the smartness of a particular decision, move, or deduction is borderline impossible. As such, please keep in mind that what will follow is my personal list of the greatest moments of intelligence, ingenuity, and quick-wittedness that the various Hunter x Hunter characters have exhibited throughout its run. While the list will be subjective in the sense that I personally may put more stock in certain types of intelligences than you perhaps might, I will do my damnedest to give rationales as to why a particular entry is placed where it is. The list may be subjective, but it isn't random or arbitrary. Two things to establish before getting into the list proper. 1. As the title suggests, all these feats will be anime only. In other words, only content up until chapter 339 will be considered. This is because I want to make a Succession Contest exclusive list in the near future. And 2. Keep in mind that I'm not talking about the top 10 most intelligent characters. What I'm ranking is the top 10 instances of characters displaying flashes of brilliance in some form or another. This means that some characters may appear more than once, while others may not appear at all, despite absolutely having the cognitive chops to do so. As an example, despite absolutely being among the top 10, and possibly even top 5, most intelligent human characters, Frollo will not be appearing on this list. With that said and established, let's get into it. We're starting off strong, cause at number 10 we've got Isaac frickin' Netero. The reason Netero's here is because he correctly predicted that both pairs of Shoot and Knuckle and Gon and Killua would end up joining the palace invasion. If you'll remember, upon running away from Pito and leaving Kite behind, Gon and Killua had to prove themselves worthy of returning to NGL and aiding in the extermination of the Chimera ants. To do so, they had to battle Morel students, namely Knuckle and Shoot, who also had to prove themselves by in turn defeating Gon and Killua. The outcome was uncertain enough that both Morel and Nov placed a bet on it, with Morel betting on Knuckle and Shoot, obviously, and Nov, presumably, but it's left ambiguous, betting on all of them, Palm included. Since neither of them got it quite right, as while Knuckle and Shoot did end up winning and going to NGL, Gon and Killua nonetheless ultimately participated in a palace invasion in the Republic of East Gorto, where Meruem had relocated. The money ultimately ended up going to the, at that point, late chairman. Now, Netero predicting that both pairs would be arriving isn't in itself that impressive, considering the possible outcomes were pretty limited. Either one of the pairs would show up, both would show up, or neither would. The only reason I am putting it at number 10 at all is because of the fact that apart from predicting that, Netero also apparently predicted the exact comment Morel would make. See, while the group were discussing whether or not Netero would contact them, he did so right at that moment, prompting Morel to comment that the old man must have satellite dishes for ears, because of his amazing timing and possibly his elongated earlobes. Netero's message said that they should split up in 3 teams of 2, implying he predicted the arrival of both pairs, instructs them they should engage the royal guards at midnight, and ends the message with a cheeky, "From the old man with the satellite ears," which actually slightly unnerves Morel. Now, while this prediction does seem a bit absurd, the only reason I'm not putting it higher is because it's possible Netero knew Morel liked to use that phrase either in general or when referring specifically to him, and guessed that they would be growing anxious due to not having heard from the old man so close to the agreed upon deadline, and knew they would be discussing him in some capacity. As you'll see, I personally value the predictions of people's behavior very highly, but due to the fact that his potential outcomes regarding the pairs arriving were limited, and the fact that it's possible he knew Morel well enough to predict what comment he'd make in a situation Netero himself could have orchestrated, I'll cautiously be putting this one at number 10. Speaking of best guy Morel, at number 9, we've got Morel literally breathing Leo to death. Throughout the series, Morel's battle IQ, ingenuity, and Hatsu versatility had all proven as absolute top tier. But nowhere has his ingenuity arguably shined brighter than during his battle with Leol. At the beginning of the fight, Leol uses Inamura, an ability he borrowed from Morel's friend Grachan, to flood the interior of the underground church they were fighting in an attempt to pin Morel down and skewer him with his conjured trident. However, Morel managed to escape the torrent using his insane lung capacity to exhale with enough force to propel himself out of the whirlpool Leol had tried to pin him down with. Then, after surfacing and taking another lungful of air, the man proceeds to hunker down at the very bottom, turn his aura into smoke underwater. I mean, I've heard about smoke on the water, but this is ridiculous. Fashion it into piping, and as I said at the beginning, literally breathe Leol to death. Or, I guess, exhale Leol to death. This whale-lunged madman outputted enough carbon dioxide to poison the overgrown furball. Now, understanding what he did isn't particularly difficult, as it at best requires primary school level chemistry. We breathe in a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Morel's preternatural lung capacity allowed him to output enough carbon dioxide to fill with it the portion of the church that was above water, which led to Leol getting carbon dioxide poisoning. It also isn't supremely complex in its execution, unlike the multi-layered tactic Morel used to catch Cheetu. Actually, I initially had that showcase of Morel's up here, but changed my mind to this, since while it was complex, he also had quite a lot of time to think about and implement it. Plus, it also doesn't help that Cheetu wasn't the smartest ant in the colony. However, the sheer lateral thinking needed to even consider doing something like this, let alone correctly calculating or intuiting that he could not only output the amount of carbon dioxide required to fill the volume of open-air space that was above water, but also be assured it would happen quickly enough to actually affect Leol, is enough to earn Morel the number 9 spot. At number 8, we have Pito and its surgery know-how, specifically with regards to neurosurgery. Mere moments after being born, hatched, and recapturing the extremely unlucky Pockle, Pito goes on to read a few books on the subject and then begins to prod at Pockle's brain so as to learn whatever she could about Nen. That's an insane feat. The phrase, "it's not exactly brain surgery," exists for a reason, and Pito managed to keep Pockle alive while prodding his brain at just the right angle, spot, and with just the right amount of pressure to elicit the responses she wanted from the soon-to-be meatball surprise. The brain is literally the most complex structure we know of, and Pito's masterful manipulation of it is something that's almost never brought up as an indicator of her uncanny biological knowledge and skill. The only reason I'm not putting this higher, or lower, is because it's obvious that all the Chimera ants, but the Royal Guards in particular, come pre-wired with extensive knowledge and are not blank slates. As such, it's quite possible Pito already had a lot of biological know-how stored in her noggin before attempting the brainstorming session. All in all, I'm comfortable putting this feat at the number 8 spot. At number 7, we've got the main boy man himself, Gon, and his now instantaneous decision to go straight for Yuppie as soon as Zeno's Dragon Dive hit the Royal Palace. Immediately after Gon, Killua, and Co. had emerged from the portal, Nov had sacrificed his sanity and hair to place next to the main stairway, the group was met with an unforeseen obstacle in the form of Yuppie, blocking their path forward. For a moment, everyone, Yuppie included, was slightly taken aback by the situation at hand. Then, while everyone was either finding their bearings, like Killua, Shoot, and Morel, or fully locking in, like Yuppie and Gon, Zeno's Dragon Dive hit, stopping in their tracks everyone except for Yuppie and Gon. While the rest were reeling from the sudden onslaught of Dragon Dive, being uncertain as to its origin and purpose, Gon was already rushing towards Yuppie, while the first wave of Dragon Lances was reaching the floor. Everyone was initially taken aback by this, since his and Killua's target was supposed to be Pitou, only for them to one after another realize that Gon indeed had not gone crazy, but was in truth making the most optimal tactical decision. See, because they were invisible, there was the chance that one of the lances pierced and killed Knuckle and Meleron, and further, there was a chance, because of Nen intensifying after death, that the two would remain invisible until they decomposed. Taking that unlikely scenario into account, Gon's target needed to change. Despite his unimaginable hate towards Pitou specifically, Gon was still fully locked in and ready to face the indomitable wall of magical beast flesh that was Youpi, only for Youpi to get pushed back by a full-blown punch from the imperceptible and very much alive Knuckle. Their respective targets and priorities fell into place, and the mission was allowed to proceed more or less as initially planned. Here's the thing, this is the only entry on this list that's here purely because of someone's quick-wittedness. Everyone else that was with Gon would have undoubtedly come to the same conclusion, given just a few more moments to reassess and yet again find their bearings. But Gon's insane focus meant that the soon-to-be man-boy was essentially thinking in Ultra Instinct. In so doing, he not only saved the group from wasting precious moments, but also inspired Shoot to the degree needed for him to break out of his cage and truly let loose against Youpi. Number 6. Komugi beating Meruem in Gungi over and over and over again. Meruem is without a doubt the most intelligent character ever showcased in the series. He's able to quickly go through a particular game's rules, develop advanced strategies within a few games, and then proceed to soundly defeat national level champions within a few hours at most. He is a low-grade supercomputer capable of processing and retaining information on a level beyond any human character in Hunter x Hunter, unless they're aided by specific abilities. I know I'm spending Komugi's spot on this list glazing Meruem, but it's the best way to communicate just what a tremendous feat it is to consistently be better than him at something. And it's also not something he's just casually interested in. He was giving it his all in every match, and the fact that he, the king of the Chimera Ants, and the supreme creature born to conquer the world, couldn't defeat the blind mouth breather of a hillbilly genuinely changed his entire outlook on life. The only reason Komugi's consistent whooping of Meruem doesn't crack the top 5 is because her mastery of Gungi was indeed aided by a Hatsu. Komugi's unnamed Hatsu allowed her to perpetually surpass her own limits under the incredibly strict vow that she'd take her own life were she to ever lose a single match. We of course got glimpses at the fact that she was a Nen genius who was partially awakened to Nen in the series proper, but in his art exhibition from a few years back, Togashi-sensei confirmed Komugi as an enhancer whose Hatsu was rated at the second highest level of proficiency. Apart from putting her Hatsu proficiency on the levels of powerhouses like Uvogin, Hisoka, and Krollos, it also implied that she had yet to reach her full potential, meaning that it could have taken Meruem months or even years to defeat her, supposing he ever would. All in all, because her unprecedented talent for and skill in Gungi was in part aided by an ability, I'm placing Komugi's consistent wins over Meruem at number 6. Cracking the top 5, we've got Killua in his battle against the Ortho siblings. During their bout, Ikalgo successfully placed the Conjure tag on Killua, which designated him as the target of their symbiotic or collaborative ability named the Needlefish Dead Darts. Once the target is tagged, the game begins as a dartboard-like pattern appears on their front. Every dart the older brother hits his board with is now instantaneously teleported to hit the corresponding area on the designated target's body. This makes the darts effectively undodgeable as they do not exist until they materialize to pierce the target. If that sounds a bit OP, that's because it is. I've already covered the ability in depth in my 8 nonsensical Nen abilities video, though I do have to warn you, it's old and my delivery is different from how it is now. So, let's go through everything Killua had to do in order to counter their ability and defeat the siblings. things. First, he had to realize what had appeared on him was a dartboard. Second, after realizing that, he needed to perfectly visualize a dartboard and map the corresponding sections and their point values onto his body. Third, he needed to mentally calculate the points that were accrued both before and after he had realized what was going on, while going on the assumption that this was a standard 501-point game. And fourth, he needed to calculate and predict where the last dart would hit, and then trust in his still very much in development Godspeed to work as intended and save him from getting yet another needle shoved in his brain. All this while already tired from fighting and woozy from blood loss. This feat by Killua showcases not only a world-class degree of focus and quick thinking, but also incredible mathematical and visual intelligence. Oh, and by the way, Killua at one point in the series said that he was bad at mental math. And while this feat could point to an inconsistency, it's also very easily explainable by him comparing his mental math skills to that of his two older brothers, namely Lumi and Miluki, who might have simply set the bar absurdly high. All in all, I can confidently say that this feat deserves to crack the top 5. Very appropriately, at number 4, believe it or not, we've got Hisoka altering his fortune to fool the Phantom Troop. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, that was impressive, but is it really 4th place impressive? Should it really be above Killua's feat of visual and mathematical prowess, for example? Personally, I'd say so. So, once Chrollo used Nyan's ability to tell everyone's fortune, the Phantom Troop began to argue about what to do, as it was apparent that many of them would continue to die if they let things play out. Hisoka's fortune was worded in such a way that it revealed the fact that he had willingly bartered with Kurapika, an act which would identify him as a traitor to the Spiders. Add to that he was at the time in their hideout and surrounded on all sides by multiple mid to high tier potential opponents, and it becomes clear that Hisoka's life was hanging on by a thread, potentially Machi's. But that's not all. He also really wanted to keep the troop in Yorknew, or else once again losing the opportunity to fight Chrollo. So, in a moment of casual brilliance, Hisoka alters his fortune via his texture surprise, making it look like he'd die were he to leave their hideout. Easy as, right? No. In order to pull this off and successfully fool some of the most perceptive, cunning, and intelligent people in the series, Hisoka had to A. think of the appropriate fortune that would paint him as an unwilling conspirator to Kurapika, B. come up with a poem that matched the tone, structure, and figurative language of the other fortunes, and C. he needed to perfectly copy lovely ghostwriter's handwriting, or else risk some of the more perceptive characters noticing something was off. The level of quick thinking, artistry, and skill displayed in that single act cannot be understated. The main reason, however, why I decided to put this showcase above Killua's is because Killua admitted to the Ortho siblings that he had mastered darts at the age of 6, because of course he did, meaning that he was, luckily for him, very familiar with the game. This, while I doubt Hisoka had any formal training in the art of poetry. While both are instances of superhuman cognition, ultimately the creativity Hisoka's feat required gives him the slight edge in my opinion. At number 3, we've got the man, the myth, the legendary deadbeat dad, Gon Freecss, for his masterful prediction of how the Zodiacs would behave during the chairman election. The man was absent from the whole series, barring flashbacks, then comes out of nowhere and starts treating the newly established top tiers of the association like they're little more than kids playing at being hunters. The man casually strolls into Beans' office, asks if there's a notepad in a conference room where the Zodiacs would convene, establishes there's an empty trash can, and then proceeds to A. correctly predict the Zodiacs would find themselves at an impasse, being unable to decide the method for the election, B. correctly predict that Cheadle would be the one to propose everyone write down their ideas on paper and then use the trash can as an impromptu container for drawing the lots, C. correctly predict that Beans would be chosen as a neutral party to pick a piece of paper from the can, and as such gave him a piece of paper with 5 rules he had already come up with, meaning that Beans begins with feign drawing and simply use Jing's own pre-made ballot. D. Establishes a signal with Beans that he should not use Jing's pre-made paper if lots aren't being drawn, and even if the pieces of paper were folded differently. And E. The fifth rule, which established Ging as the election committee chairman, was made as a decoy to make the Zodiacs more easily accept the other rules, particularly Rule 4, which necessitated that all hunters put their names on their ballots. All the other Zodiacs, barring Pariston, who greatly benefited from knowing who voted for whom, considering he had a solid 1/5 of the Hunter Association in his pocket, would have objected to this rule because of how much it benefited Pariston, and may have even tossed Jing's proposition wholesale and moved on to another method for determining the rules. With this fifth rule, which Ging fully intended to give up when challenged on, he ensured the Zodiacs would be far more inclined towards accepting his proposal. I don't think going into further detail as to why this feat deserves such a high spot is necessary, since I think it speaks for itself, so I'll move on to the next one. At number 2, we've got Ging, yet again, / Pariston essentially predicting the whole of the election arc from there on out. Both Ging and Pariston predicted the broad strokes of how the election would proceed, even if they got some details wrong along the way. When the Zodiacs initially convened, Pariston playfully teased Ging about the fact that his son may potentially die, asking him whether or not he should bother with visiting the little guy, since if he ends up dying, Pariston would have wasted his valuable time, obviously. Then, as soon as Ging confidently told Pariston that Gon wouldn't die and that he should visit him, Pariston could at that moment envision how the election would turn out. It would be Ging and him on the podium vying for first place, at which point a fully healed Gon would make a grand entrance and finally meet up with his elusive father, at which point Ging could supremely easily sway the crowd to his side and gain the votes he'd need to soundly defeat Pariston. While most of the broad strokes of Pariston's prediction were correct, things didn't pan out exactly like that. He couldn't have predicted Leorio confronting Ging, or Ging antagonizing him into shoryukening him from across the room, the fact that Ging wouldn't actually commit to the bit and essentially spend most of the election dozing off, and so on. When he did realize that, Pariston was essentially sure that his victory was guaranteed. However, he became 100% certain when he felt the surge of Nen coming off of Nanika's cleansing of Gon's self-imposed curse, as it meant that Gon was healed and would be making an appearance very soon, thus making Leorio lose interest in the election and essentially taking away the wind out of Leorio's sails, since his platform of "I'm going to make the whole Hunter Association my bitch until you save Gon" would at that point be null and void. I do find it funny and slightly humanizing how soon after feeling the surge, he essentially sets the stage for Gon to arrive, but he doesn't, at which point the Rat Zodiac admits that he indeed isn't an omniscient god. Unlike the Zodiacs, whom both Ging and Pariston know very well, and who had gathered with a specific goal in mind and could, as such, in my opinion, be more easily predicted and manipulated, the election involved far too many factors, groups, and individuals, both directly and indirectly influencing it in order for anyone to predict it in its entirety. However, Pariston and Ging both predicting the broader strokes of the election with so little to go on was a superhuman feat of such magnitude that even Cheadle, the dog Zodiac and one of the most intelligent among them, could only growl in frustration when Pariston finally admitted to his insane level of prescience. Finally, at number 1, we have maybe the briefest entry on this list, since it's another one of those that just speaks for itself. Meruem finding an opening in Netero's 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva, not once, but twice. Keep in mind, at the very height of their duel, the narrator said that Netero struck Meruem with over 1,000 blows in less than a minute. That's a low ball of 17 Bodhisattva slaps per second. Now, also keep in mind that depending on which hand Netero chooses to go with, there could be more than a dozen slaps coming at the king at the same time. And him finding a needle in the haystack not once, but twice is an unparalleled feat of raw, unadulterated processing and computing speed. The number of possible permutations of attack patterns is astonishing, and the only reason Meruem was able to get past Netero's attacks was because he could compute them with enough enough clarity and speed to identify Netero's unconscious biases for choosing specific patterns of attack at specific angles and distances. A skill he had indirectly sharpened while playing Gungi with Komugi, particularly since Gungi does have a third-dimensional aspect to it since players can stack pieces on top of each other. Despite all that practice with Netero, he still couldn't beat Komugi in Gungi though. I guess even post-Rose Meruem has some limits. And those were my picks for the top 10 smartest moments in Hunter x Hunter. What do you guys think? Do you agree with the placements? Would you move any of them around? And if so, why? Are there any other moments that you would have included? Feel more than free to share your thoughts down below. Before signing off, I'd very much like to thank the thinkers and overthinkers for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.